Can you imagine if you had like a phone call and you're like, oh my god, I gotta fumble with my ear things? Like, nobody would do that. Like, give me a break. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am doing a classic sci-fi book review of the book Mirror Friend, Mirror Foe by George Takei and Robert Aspin. It's from 1979 and the cover is absolutely amazing. This is actually a reread. I don't usually do this. I read this book back in May of 2011. So at the time I gave it 2.5 stars. Has my opinion changed in 10 years? You'll have to see. Actually, no, not really. I'm giving it 3 stars this time. It just squeezed in there. Yeah. Obviously, I originally bought this book because A, it says it was written by George Takei and he's amazing, and B, because look at the cover. Like, as I've said, the cover is fantastic. Well, what is this book about? As I said, it's from 1979, according to Goodreads at least. It wasn't co-written actually by George Takei and Robert, but it was based on Takei's idea and written by Robert Aspin. I keep calling him Aspirin, not Aspirin. I guess that sounds kind of the same. Anyway, this story. I'm very tired today. This story follows a man called Hosato, a professional killer and a saboteur who is also a fencing master. And he comes across, and he comes across a plot to reprogram all robots to kill the human race. It's, yeah. It's not great. While Hosato is an interesting and deliberate character choice at the time of publication due to the lack of people of color starring in Western action stories, he wasn't very fleshed out or likable. It's hard to get a bead kind of on what his deal is, and he doesn't change really over the course of the novel. Like, he doesn't really have any kind of revelations. Likewise, the other characters, Sasha, James, Rick, and a man named the Hungarian, have all the depth of, like, a kiddie swimming pool. We learn next to nothing about any of them, and they don't develop or change. I mean, they're fine, they're entertaining characters, but they're not very deep. The plot also wasn't that engaging. I liked the overall concept, but the execution didn't make for a very exciting story. I also wasn't sure about the timeline near the end. It kind of was drawn out in a way that I didn't really understand. You know, it had its moments of entertainment, and it was very easy to read, so I did enjoy it, but it, you know, it's kind of meh. It's not very memorable. Yeah, but that cover though, that cover. As I said, I'm giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. And who do I recommend it to? I don't know, super fans of George Takei? Before I launch into my kind of analysis of this book, I'm going to go over the technology because I always like to do this. The novel both shines in terms of the technology as well as being completely dated, but it's an interesting kind of contradiction. First we have Susie, who is Hosato's combination equipment closet and fencing assistant. She stands about 6 feet tall and is a giant floating box with a mannequin arm attached. I'm assuming she has gender because her voice is female, I don't know. I pictured her as the armoire from Beauty and the Beast with a weird human arm growing out of it most of the time, but all metal. Susie is more than she seems, as she's a complex AI who's capable of sarcasm and extrapolation, but Hosato hides this from most people. He just pretends she's kind of this dumb robot. She follows the basic laws of robotics, you know, thrown down by Asimov years and years ago, where she can't hurt or harm a human being, which, you know, this kind of fuels the basis of the plot, given the robots start to attack. So he explains that concept to us as if we didn't know what it was. I mean, some people may not. Okay, so another technology is that companies have lie detectors built into their chairs, which they apparently don't have to inform potential employees about when they're interviewing them. I was like, well, that's unethical. I also am very fond of this woman's phone that she has in this section here. A high-pitched beeping interrupted the conversation. Quick as a flash, Sasha palmed the communication unit off her belt, unreeled the earplug, and fitted it to her ear in one easy motion. Can you imagine if you had like a phone call and you're like, oh my god, I gotta fumble with my ear things? Like, nobody would do that. Like, give me a break. Anyways, it's kind of a funny concept. There are also conveyor belts built underneath bar tops that take your empty drink away from you and send up some new ones. This was an absolutely genius idea, and I'm totally behind this idea. You don't have to talk to the bartender, you just like put your drink on and get it when it comes up. It's pretty cool. Hosato also has a ninja slash spy outfit he wears at a few points, which is basically just like Predator stealth mode, given it's based on some kind of a light relay system. So it's not camouflage, it's like, I don't know. All I could think about was Predator, and I was like, that's amazing. There was also a sweet tank in the book that reminds me of the tanks from Damnation Alley, except with like pincer arms on the front. Did you know that I write for a website called postapocalypticmedia.com? Here comes a pitch for you. I'm currently in the middle of this 20 vehicle car battle. Like, you know, we have Mad Max's Pursuit Special versus the Mustang from Cherry 2000 and like the Landmaster I just mentioned versus like the tank from Tank Girl. So it's like all different post-apocalyptic vehicles from different movies, and I've pitted them against one another, and there's like a battle each week. Anyway, it's really fun. You should check it out. I've included a link in my description to the first one, so you can kind of read through all of them. It's kind of fun. I don't know. I like it. Another bit of technology, I think this is the last bit, is a modified dueling epi that shoots a bullet on impact. It made no sense. It just made no sense. I was like, what? Anyway. Yeah, that's most of the technology. There's other bits of technology in the book, but I mean, I'm not going to go through every single little thing. If you do like cool kind of speculative world building, this does have a lot of that. Okay, so onwards to my spoilers. I talk about race and women mainly, as this book can give me a lot else to talk about, but there are a couple of funny parts at the end I wanted to mention. Overall, this book doesn't have any wild moments. Like, there's really nothing. I kind of find one that's like really, really like sexist or something to talk about, so I can go on a rant. We'll see next time maybe. Okay. So in terms of race, it's obvious that Hosato is Japanese to prove a point in this book. The fact that this seems rather forced now when I read it is actually a good thing, I think, because it suggests that we're moving forwards in terms of representation in our novels. Granted, we have a long way to go, especially in sci-fi, especially in pulp sci-fi, with that kind of characterization, but it's way better now. I mean, given how many of these old books I read, I can count on one hand how many Asian people are main characters or even in the novels. So, I mean, this was a deliberate kind of screw you to an industry that was very white and also very male. There's a few times where this racism is kind of brought up, which is interesting. So on page 8 of the book, like barely into the book, Hosato calls out a character who makes a stereotypical judgment about him, almost like he's telling the reader, you know, don't you make any assumptions either, dick. Later on, like a few pages later, there's also another character who makes a far more racist comment, to which Hosato just gets up and leaves. So another kind of, and that character was meant to be seen as, you know, a negative character, so I think that was kind of showing that racist people in this book are going to be villains, so that's interesting. There's also another part where a character says he can't tell the difference between Hosato and a Chinese man, which Hosato again has to contend with and deal with, which I imagine is frustrating, especially for people who still have to deal with that today. So all of these things that I mentioned happen in the first 30 pages, as if the story were setting us up to see what kind of bullshit Hosato has to deal with in his daily life all the time. Given I wasn't even born in 1979, this is something I'm assuming Takei and many people of Asian descent had to deal with in the 60s and 70s. So for him to presume that this would still be happening in 200 plus years is very telling of kind of what he has to deal with. Hell, it does still happen, as we know from people's reactions to COVID-19. So definitely this book is not, you know, a product of its time. It's dealing with something that is still going on. After these incidents, though, Hosato's dealings with racial insensitivity kind of drop off. It is interesting, though, that his relationship with Sasha as a white woman is interesting as a big deal. So actually, I think that was kind of progressive. Like, that was never mentioned. They just hook up, and that's fine. Speaking of Sasha, I'm going to move on to the ladies now. In terms of female representation, this was far from egregious. There are 3 female characters: Susie, the robot, I guess, technically, Sasha, the chief of security for the company that Hosato is spying on, and Carolyn, a secretary that tries really, really hard to get in Hosato's pants. Like, tries so hard, and he's, like, either oblivious to it somehow, or he's just not interested. We don't really know. She dies off screen, which is also when we learn her name. So it was kind of weird that we went through pages and pages of her talking and stuff without naming her. I don't know what that was trying to do, or whether it was just an oversight they never corrected, but it was kind of weird. I was like, okay, poor thing. Sasha is the main female character. She's described as attractive, but she's not hypersexualized. She's svelte, apparently. An expression that we don't, or a word we don't use enough today. Svelte. With a jumpsuit that hugged her curves. Ooh. But we don't get any, like, weird ogling of her by anybody, which is nice. I wasn't super happy they called a woman in her late 20s a girl, but whatever, I guess. I liked Sasha. She was tough and ambitious. She, having recently lost her entire arm, manages to somehow take out two dudes using a desk lamp, though we don't get to see that scene on the aftermath. That was kind of annoying. I was like, what? We don't get to see her, like, take out two dudes with a lamp? You just tell us about it? That was kind of one of the problems with the novel, too. A lot of these action scenes take place off screen, and we just kind of see them afterward, and it's like, no, we want to read about that. She also has this speech that I'm sure many women can relate to today. Actually, she said confidentially, I think some of the people who signed the authorization were hoping I'd fall flat on my face. To this day, I don't know which ones resented me because I was young and which ones didn't like me because I was a woman in one of the last fields dominated by men, but the bad feeling was there. They were like a pack of vultures waiting for me to stumble. Let me tell you, Hayama, it's a great incentive not to make a mistake. Yeah. So, basically, imposter syndrome, as well as talking about how, even today it still happens, but definitely in the 70s, you know, how women had to work extra hard just to be seen as capable, let alone, you know, amazing at their jobs. So yeah. Sasha isn't initially interested in Hosoto sexually, or at least we don't know because we don't get to see her perspective. Eventually they do hook up, but it felt mutual and respectful, and it wasn't like some kind of prize for Hosoto. It was just like, it just happened. I can't say they had any chemistry whatsoever, though, to be honest. Like, when it did happen, I was like, oh, this seems like it just kind of happened because it did, not because they actually have some kind of a good deep connection with one another, but whatever. Yeah, I think women are treated pretty well in this book. I mean, way better than I'm used to reading from books from 1979. There's a couple funny parts I wanted to mention just because they're pretty good. So, Hosato's taking a tour of McRae Enterprises, which is where he works now. Okay. Hosoto hung back as the crowd jostled forward to snap pictures of the guide robot. It was both an amusing and annoying habit of tourists everywhere. The guide robot was no different from any of the thousands of information robots throughout the galaxy, but the tourists would faithfully take pictures of it anyway. Just as they took pictures of wastebaskets and lampposts, it seemed the only requirement for an object to be photographed was that it be located somewhere other than the tourist's home planet. And it was kind of a funny joke on tourism. It's just true. People do take pictures of weird stuff. And this is just a funny part that I just think was funny. So Hosoto and Sasha are at a bar talking about ninjas, actually. Ooh. Romanticism. Sasha leaned back, studying him with a cocked eyebrow. I suppose you feel that entitles you to carry me off to your room for activities of dubious morality. Certainly not, Hosoto laughed. In fact, that was the furthest thing from my mind. This is funny on both levels. First, because of activities of dubious morality is an amazing way to talk about sex. And secondly, because he turns her down so flat and he gets so mad. She gets so mad on the next page, and I'm like, oh, jeez. Cold, ice cold. Anyway, so yeah, if you want to read a book about George Takei being ice cold to women, which shouldn't be surprising. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it was a nice, quick little book. I would say it's amazing, but I also wouldn't say it's terrible. Do I recommend it? I'm keeping it for the cover, though. Anyway, thanks for watching.